Hello, everyone out there watching and joining us live. And also, hello to everyone who is watching on the replay. My name is LJ. I am the founder of Maroon Arts and Culture, and this is our weekly Working in Theater webinar, co-produced by Maroon Arts and Culture and Center Theater Group. Every week, we discuss a topic on what it's like to work in the theater in 2020 with all of the new circumstances, new technology, and new approaches that we have out there. This week, I am really excited to welcome two guests to discuss networking versus community building. But first, let me just say that we do have open captioning available. So if you need to access the open captioning, there is a link in the chat. And we also want to thank the California Arts Council, a state agency, and the National Arts and Disability Center at UCLA for supporting open captioning. Okay, so my guests today are Michaela Buckley. Sorry, Camille, I'm stepping on Camille's toes. And Christina Pacheco. And please, both of you, correct me if I said your names wrong. Michaela is a freelancer and a producer, and Christina is a strategist, and she is CEO of her own company. You can find websites on the Padlet. Her company is called Fierce, FRCE, but the website I think is in the chat. You can find both of their websites also on the Padlet. I'll let them introduce themselves and say a little bit about themselves. Michaela, do you want to go first?
Sure. So, hi, my name is Michaela Buckley. I work in mostly art service organizations, specifically theater related. So I've worked with LA Stage Alliance, Emerging Arts Leaders Los Angeles, and I've really focused on kind of like leadership building and strategic planning for both of those things. I'm really excited to be here. I was also a CTG intern several years back, so it's been fun to come back and have this conversation.
Thank you, Christina.
Good to be with you all. I'm a longtime fan of CTG. I'm the newest fan of Maroon, so glad to be here and glad to be in conversation with you all. My career has evolved over the years, but in the Los Angeles community, was formerly the director of programs at Arts for LA, did a lot in the world of art and advocacy. And transitioned to my own consulting practice and now my own company, where I've really worked at the intersection of arts practice, social justice movements, and civic engagement. And so it's taken me a lot of different directions, but I get to work across sectors to really advance initiatives, projects, campaigns, and events. So happy to be here.
Thank you both so much for joining us. I'm so excited to discuss this week's topic. I framed it as networking versus community building, but I think that was my own insecurity and fear of the word networking. I've always felt that the word networking is a little scary and involves things that I don't know how to do. But as I think I've mentioned on this webinar before, the book Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown kind of helped me change the way that I think about building a community in support of my arts organization. So let's just jump right into it. Before we came on live, Christina, you said something that I thought was really interesting. You said everything is relational. Can you tell us a little bit what you mean by that?
That was a motto that my mentor always said. Everything is relational, and I really held it to be a personal motto of mine. I have found in my work that everything that we're able to do that really moves the needle is a great production we're proud of, is any major accomplishment that we see in our professional world has a network of relationships that's required in order to make that thing successful. We rarely are lone wolves or on our own island. And so when we think about the required network, relationships, it all has a relational component to it. And so being strong in our ability to both build and maintain our professional and personal relationships is been essential to me in my career.
Absolutely. I think that's what we're working on right now as I continue to build Maroon Arts and Culture. I know I confessed to both of you that I am just, this is just a part of the job of a founder that I'm just the most uncomfortable with, partly because it makes me nervous to talk about myself, but also because I just don't even know what I'm supposed to be doing. So networking, community building, are these two things the same thing? Do you consider them to be the same thing? And if not, what are the differences?
I mean, I think networking, community building are not necessarily the same thing. I also don't, I'm not personally nervous by the term networking because I've just shifted it differently in my mind when I'm going to networking events. I think community, I mean, they are both extremely relational. I think it depends on kind of where that person is in your relationship and the boundaries you set with these people. So I know that I have people that are in my network that are not necessarily in my community. And being able to kind of know the differences between those helps me figure out exactly what resources I need or what resources I can provide. Not only to protect my boundaries and make sure that I'm not getting taken advantage of in a transactional way, but also to know just what is my bandwidth as a personal producer, leader, community member as well. So I don't think networking and community building are 100% the same thing. But I don't think either of them are a bad thing.
Christina, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think networking's connotation tends to feel a little bit more stuffy, or maybe like you got to put on a show and show up in a certain way in order to be received and or build relationships. And I can certainly understand where that feels. I think somebody wrote in the chat like disingenuous, or it feels like you're trying to fake it. And so I think I rarely use the term networking for myself. I to come back to relationships, relationship building for me is kind of what I always think of. And we have relationships for all kinds of reasons, and I think one thing that I think is really important, regardless if it's for the purpose of building your own community, when I think of community building, for me, that's like a network of support. That's where I'm going with a level of like vulnerability, or I can be my full self in a community of people that I've built that I trust. And I think that is an incredibly important part of our professional career. I think we think about community building a lot in our personal lives, like who's my community, who's my go-to, but it's also really important, especially if you're freelancing or if you're just like advancing in a sector, to know who are all the players and who are people who are my peers in other organizations or my peers doing similar kinds of work. So to come back, for me, the relationship building thing is like, I haven't been able to move anywhere in my career without having leveraged or gone after certain relationships, or people have sought me out for my relationship to others. And I think I don't hold cards super close to my chest in that way, where I'm like hiding the Rolodex. I like to think of it as like, if we're all in it for the same common purpose, then we all have something to offer in terms of our network to one another. So how does that land?
I think that lands great. I think it, like you said, it comes back to relationship building, right? Like everything is relational. So let's get into it. Like, how do you find these relationships? How do you identify individuals or organizations that you need to have a relationship with? Any advice for that? I know that's a super broad question, but that's what we're here for.
I can answer that first. I think, well, actually, Michaela, do you want to answer first? I love your voice.
Yeah, so I think it kind of, when it comes to like, where do you find these people? I think sometimes it's a little bit of like being in the right place at the right time. And sometimes it is just maybe trusting someone. And so I think all of these things build on each other. So I can very much kind of like contact trace like how I got my last job was based on like, if I root it back enough to my sophomore year theater history teacher, promote like getting me a job with her friend, who then helped me get my internship, who then helped me get my job. And it's just like, when you start building these relationships specifically as a younger person in your career, you can be really surprised, or at least I was really surprised to see how they grow. And so like my specific example is like when I was an intern at CTG, the person that was working in the same department as me then co-produced the Ovation Awards with me last year. And so to be able to see that relationship grow, and from him going as someone in my network who I didn't necessarily have a close relationship with because I was an intern and he was a professional, and to have my professional career grow and to be able to then build that into a real relationship, a real professional relationship, was something that was really important. And now we're constantly like pitching each other ideas, pitching each other projects, because now he's, you know, part of that community that I feel like I can be like, hey, here's this really weird, stupid idea. What do you think? Where I wouldn't have done that when I was an intern, if that makes sense. Like it all depends on just kind of showing up and taking those risks and being vulnerable to be able to continue to show up. So like, you know, sometimes it's volunteering in an event with your friend. Sometimes it's going to a mixer, a networking mixer by yourself. Sometimes it's, and especially now it's a little bit harder, but even just like commenting on someone's Instagram post, being like, wow, this is really cool. I'm really proud of this project that you're working on, or something like that. Or sending someone a DM being like, hey, I see that you keep working on these really cool things. Like, just want to say, I think that's awesome. So it's just about, it's kind of like dating. Like you just got to put yourself out there and like keep showing up and keep being your best self, and then continue to build those relationships.
Awesome. So I hear you saying, first, look around at who's already in your spaces, right? Your fellow interns, your friends who are volunteering with you to do things, and then being vulnerable and open enough to continuing relationships with them, and then continuing to engage and interact with them, whether it's in person or even online through social media and things like that. Christina, what's your advice for finding these relationships and networks?
I was thinking about it. I agree with everything you shared, Michaela. I think about it in kind of three distinct buckets. So there is a network to be built around knowing who your fellow people are, who are the players in your field. So if you are a producer or you're an artist or you want to be an artistic director or whatever the things are, who are the other artistic directors? Who are the other people who are playing a similar role that you're playing in a different company or a different organization? Do you know each other? So that's kind of one, is like building your network of people who are already doing what you want to do. And then the second part of that is be a known person within those spaces. And one of the strategies I found there is to show up frequently. So showing up at the gatherings that are around, artistic practice, or showing up at the conferences that are around artistic practice, whatever it is that is your field, your niche, showing up and being a visible player in there so people know who you are. And then the last thing, which I think is really an important part of networking and relationship building, is supporting others trying to get in the space. So this has been a really important part of my career, is as I was able to build a relationship, I was then able to open a door for someone else who also wanted to be in that same field or do something similar. And in doing that, we also expand our own network, because then we're also known as someone who has a deep well of relationships for people. When you need a contractor for something, you need a stage manager, you need a whatever, and to have a network of relationships, it's not just for your own gain, but is about your contribution to the space in general, I think is also like a really important function of relationship building.
I really love that last piece, that allegory of the cave, right? Like you're supposed to turn around and help some people behind you. And then that is also a way of growing and expanding your network, because now you've created a network of people that are helping you, but then also a network of people that you're helping. And yes, continuing to build those relationships. I really like that. So if you have any questions for this topic in the chat, please make sure that you go ahead and drop them now. Christine has to leave us at 1:00, so get your questions in early and we'll make sure that we get to them. But I do have a quick question before we get to the chat. So you all mentioned mixers and things like that. And I'm wondering, is there still value in things like professional organizations, all of these young artists, young leadership organizations where the whole goal is to mix and mingle. Like, do you still find value in those kinds of programs in 2020?
So I work with an organization called Emerging Arts Leaders, Los Angeles, and I obviously find a lot of value in it. I've been with that group for 4 years now, starting as, someone that went to mixers and now actually working with that organization. And I think it really just depends on what your goal is. And so, and again, like Christina was saying, of trying to show up in spaces that are potentially being occupied by other people that you want to be like or be around. And so if you're not necessarily interested of being in like a leadership position yet, because I think everyone has the capacity to be a leader, you can start by maybe just taking like an improv class, or maybe showing up in like different ways where there's going to be a group of people that you're consistently getting to know. So I do think that I think be careful, because there are some groups that are like, pay $150 initiation fee and now you get to be on this like whatever. And I don't think those are always super necessary, but I do think participating in an organization whose goal is to try and connect people has value. Because it also takes a lot of energy away from you, because you don't have to go find those people. These people are already gathering together.
I've been to a few. I went to an ELA mixer last year before COVID shut everything down, and it was a lot of fun. It was a good talk, and it was in a very cool gallery. So highly recommend that you all check them out. And I also really like the idea of kind of taking the pressure off professional organizations and like super professional networking by taking an improv class or a writing class, or anything that's going to put you in the room with people who have similar interests to you. I feel like that's a little bit less pressure than like, oh, I'm going to go put on my best blazer and go mix and mingle. I would much rather be in a room with other artists and that do similar things. Christina, what do you think?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's I'm of two minds. I've kind of, in my personal practices around relationship building and networking, have kind of challenged myself in the last couple of years. So there are certainly communities that I feel like I'm already kind of a member of this group. We've been doing work together. I know these folks, we gather often. I need that group to like reconnect with my people, right? I'm like, oh my God, I haven't seen you in so long. What are you working on? Like, what's happening? Like, there's just something that is like necessary about coming back to the people we know well or have collaborated with and who understand our experience in some way, kind of that like network of people that are, like I was talking about, kind of in your field, your peers. And then I really challenged myself to step outside of the kind of well-worn path in that way and be a part of professional networks that I wouldn't have necessarily subscribed to before. So in founding my own company, I'm a member of a couple, founding women's founder organizations or professional networks. And, we have a Slack channel and we have an email thread. And I have found like it's been so helpful to something that maybe wasn't kind of art practitioners or more of the traditional space that I've been in before, to have a new network of people that is a different way that I identify. So maybe it's, based on your age or where you live in town or your city council or your city, your neighborhood council, things that are other kinds of ways that we affiliate ourselves beyond our titles, I think is also an important muscle to flex depending on where you are in your career and what you're wanting to do. So I find tremendous value in spaces that I know well and are kind of like my people, and things that are new that stretch me to see and expand my own self-definition.
Yes, I love that kind of, like it's kind of the idea of this is your community and these are the people that you go to when you need things and when you need resources, and then your network. And it's like, these are the new people that you're getting to know, and that there's potential to build further relationships there. So let's get into some questions from the chat, and then I'll come back to something that I thought that was really interesting. So Lee, who is in our working group actually, wants to know, how do we bridge the gap of relationship building and job searching? Whenever I'm networking, I struggle with transitioning from the dating, getting to know you stage to the I need a job stage. So I think that this is kind of like making the ask, right? Like, how do you engage with your community and then like ask somebody for something? Do you have any advice for that?
I love to ask, or I love when people ask. I think, there are certainly things that feel taboo, but I think a piece of advice that I received was asking for something versus asking for advice will always get you a different outcome. So if you're coming to somebody saying, I'm in the place of looking for jobs, do you have advice for me on my resume? Do you have any advice on where I could look for more job opportunities? Any job boards that you know about? So sometimes if the question's uncomfortable to ask directly, can you get me a job? Maybe you ask for advice about the best way for you to go about getting a job. Or maybe you know somebody who works for an organization that you want to work for. Instead of maybe asking directly for the referral, ask, is there things that I should know about this organization that maybe I wouldn't find on their website so I can be a more competitive candidate? And you can come into it from a place of advice versus a direct request. But I personally love the direct request too. And I don't mind it. I've been asked for those things in the past and I find it refreshing, but another way to go about it is seeking advice.
Michaela, do you have advice?
I completely agree, as someone that has been in that position pretty recently of looking for work, and it's not embarrassing to be looking for work. Like, it's not embarrassing to be wanting to take on a new challenge or wanting to take on a new step of your career. And so I think that there is a little bit of, shame around being like, oh, I don't want to ask for a job. I want to make it seem like jobs come to me. Like, I want to make it seem like I'm, completely sought after. And I think getting over that fear and recognizing that people want to help you, even if they can't necessarily hire you, especially that's the point of like the relationship building. And just being honest and saying like, hey, I'm either looking for a new opportunity. I was doing projects like this, and now I'm hopefully leaning towards projects like this other thing. And recognizing, like Camille said, you have value. You bring value to a team, and you don't have to put that forward of like, well, you have to hire me because I'm the best thing that's ever happened to this whatever. But knowing that like people want to help you and you can ask. And I think asking for advice and even just asking directly of like, hey, I saw that the company that you're working for is hiring. I submitted my application. Would you mind putting in a good word for me? And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. And if it doesn't, then at least you tried. And normally they'll keep in mind like, oh, hey, well, Michaela's looking for a gig. She didn't get this one for whatever reason. But like, if there's another one later, or if I hear of something, I'll send it her way. And so it's just about putting yourself out there. And it's scary, but you can either sit and like not have a job and not get a job and just like panic about it, or you can put yourself out there to the people who care about you.
I think this is something that has come up, I think, in previous weeks. And the answer is always like, you just have to do it. The answer is you just have to do it. You need to find yourself a meditation for courage, find yourself a mantra for bravery, and then just make the ask. That's what I'm working on now as well. Especially when it comes to things like fundraising. We're a new organization, so we basically just existing off of support from friends and families, and then like hopes and prayers, and like that's about it. So I'm still practicing asking for fundraising and donations and things like that. Do you all have any advice for that specifically, or is it the same thing? You just got to make the ask.
So I always try to, because I also like being super honest, I have really bad anxiety. And so for me, it's always like, I just have to send one email. Just send one email. And then I realize that it's not that scary. And then I just like go. But like just saying like, instead of making it super overwhelming, like I have to ask 50 people, and all of these people probably don't want to give me money, and they probably actually hate me. And what am I even doing with my life? Because we go down that cycle, or at least I do sometimes. And so just saying like, okay, no, I'm sending this one email. The worst they're going to do is say no. And then nothing happens. Like, that's the worst thing they're going to say is like, not, I don't have the money now, or I don't have the opportunity now. And then you're going to move on with your life, but you're going to be okay.
I hope so. Christina, do you have any advice for fundraising asks?
So depends what you're building, right? So if you've got a for-profit company, or you're looking for some seed money, you're an early startup, I really, I value this, and I think it's a really great strategy of use your community first. There's so many crowdfunding opportunities out there. I love, there's I Fund Women, there's Kickstarter, there's Indiegogo, and then there's a million other ways, like a million platforms that help you through technology reach your community first. So even if it was a group of friends and family that you demonstrated gave you $10, and you have 50 people to do that for you, and then you can come to a funder saying, I have a network of supporters. These are people who want to see this work show up in the world. They've been able to contribute this dollar amount, and this number of people have been giving consistently or gave a one-time gift. Having a little bit of backing from your immediate community, I think sometimes it's almost scarier to ask our closer people for support than it is to ask a random stranger. So start with the exercise of telling people what you're doing. That's the first step, right, of fundraising, is invite people into something you believe in. So if you're starting up a company, you're starting up your own consulting practice or whatever it is, and you believe in what you offer and what you're doing, tell other people about it. Give them a chance to support you, either by writing you a recommendation, sending in a small donation, whatever it might be. Put a quote on your website that says, like, I endorse your work, co-sign on your work through LinkedIn. There's so many ways to ask our immediate network first to support us, and then we can demonstrate value to people who may not know about us by showing that there is a group of people who want to see our work in the world.
I love that. So yes, start with your immediate community and then use that as a little confidence boost when you go ask people that you may not know. That's great advice.
Can I add something on that real quick?
Yeah.
Like, if you do, like, and this happened to me pretty early in my career, is that I did find myself in a community of people who did not support the work that I was doing or didn't see the bigger picture of the work that I was doing. And that's not necessarily a reflection to stop doing the work, but to find a new community. And that's just, I wasn't hanging out with the right people. They just didn't have the same big dreams as I did. So they just didn't necessarily get the work that I was doing. And my options were, okay, do I either stick with this community and change my dreams, or do I just change the people around me? And so, especially when you're young and you're just starting your career and you're probably around other people who are figuring out their career, it's okay to outgrow circles that you're in and find new circles.
That's really excellent advice as well, especially as I know some of our participants are emerging artists. And, it's when you're in college, especially if you're getting a theater degree, you tend to be surrounded by other theater people all the time. But depending on what path you take after college, or even the other way around, if you're into your high school theater program and maybe you choose not to go on to college, then it's kind of like, how do you find that group of theater people once again, once you're kind of out of that insulated community. So yes, I definitely think that's great advice. Don't be afraid to outgrow certain circles. And we already talked about how you can seek out other circles and people who are interested in the same thing as you. For example, taking classes in professional organizations. So I'm definitely going to make sure that I add to the Padlet I Fund Women, Kickstarter, and Indiegogo, so that we can, so that our participants have these resources available. I did want to talk a little bit about how technology has changed the way that we interact with our community and our network. Crowdfunding is definitely a big thing that I've seen a lot of organizations turn to. Do you all have any input or advice on like how technology is kind of influencing our networking / relationship building?
I don't know anybody who hires that doesn't go to somebody's LinkedIn and probably their Instagram if it's a public account. So, there's so much value to just keeping our stuff fresh. And if we are, building our own brand, so to speak, so if you're a consultant or you're wanting to be kind of seen as a, I want to be the artistic director or something, that you brand your public facing stuff accordingly. Not that you have to exclusively post about, like theater or any career set that you're in, but be mindful of the brand that you're presenting and kind of think of yourself in that way. So your LinkedIn and being active in different spaces so that your content is fresh. I think is valuable in the social space. And then I think, I have found a full revamping. I'm a live experience producer most of the time. So COVID has required a dramatic shift in the way that we connect with each other as human beings. And so having, it can be exhausting to be on Zoom all day and to go to that one more thing where we're going to put our face on a screen with our pajama bottoms on. But sometimes you gotta, like make choices that feel right to you and that like honor where you're at, but also like it's valuable to keep showing up, even though there can be digital fatigue in this time, is just to stay with it and find something that has a little bit of a life spring, a bit of a life source to it for you.
Wonderful. Michaela, technology and networking.
Yes, I think it's also totally agree with Christina, and also knowing again where your audience is. And so I know I tend to work a lot with theater producers who are older than me, and so I know a lot of times that they're on Facebook. And so my Facebook looks like my LinkedIn. It has all the professional things that I'm doing. It has blog posts that I write. It has things that I'm participating in. And then my Instagram tends to be obviously directed towards people my age or a little bit younger. And so they're all the same content. It's just kind of like, how do I talk about it? And so while on Instagram, I'm probably going to be a little bit more vulnerable, maybe talk about, the election or mental health or things like that, or my cat that I just got. Whereas Facebook is probably going to be just a little bit more clean and specific about my career, just knowing again, who are you trying to talk to? And also something like, don't be afraid of social media. My friend over COVID has become like this crazy TikTok celebrity doing just piano duets. Like that's all, he just missed being able to sing with his friends. And so he was playing piano and letting people duet him on TikTok. And now he has like this crazy community. They all like duetted each other to be able to do a virtual show choir. And, you can find community in other ways. And so I was really proud that he just was able to find a community in a new way on TikTok, which is something that maybe a lot of us would say like, no, like TikTok's too young for me. TikTok's too weird for me. And it's like, he just had fun with it and built a whole new community. Yeah, I definitely agree that Instagram tends to be my business card. Like if I'm at a networking event, I literally I've put my Instagram on my business card. I've handed that out to people, or if I'm out of business cards, and it's probably someone that's like probably on Instagram, because I feel like you can tell through conversation like who's on Instagram or not, and say like, hey, just follow me on Instagram. That's how you can probably reach me. I've had people DM me for jobs on Instagram, and there's no shame in the Instagram game.
Oh my gosh, I actually am having an issue right now where, as I build Maroon Arts and Culture, people are finding me on Instagram, and my Instagram is not like my business Instagram. It's like, vacation pictures and like food that I cook. So I kind of like, I don't know what to do. Do I switch it up and like try to make it more businessy, or do I get a whole separate account, or what?
I have a similar thing. I've been in a similar dilemma. And I do think that there's something to say, which is that you're allowed to be a human, in all of your professional spaces. Like be who you are, especially if you are the brand, right? If people are seeking, you out specifically, Michaela, or whatever, where like they want to work with you. They want to know like, what are you about? What are you into? Like, what do you stand for? And so I think there's great value to both running your socials as kind of an outlet for your business and what you do. And it's great to run your socials like just in a really personal way, but that speaks to your values and who you are. I think it's just about telling your story. So what's the story you want to tell? And I imagine this is a great group of storytellers.
I hope so. I'm sorry. I have to plug my computer in. We're on live, but this is what we have to do.
And just going off of that as well, I think if you do want to have a difference between like your business Instagram and your personal Instagram, I would say put your personal Instagram, don't put your full name, put it on private, make sure it's just your friends. So that way people don't accidentally find that. Not that like you'd be hiding anything, but if you wanted to be super clear about like, this is my professional profile and this is my personal profile, I've tried to have like a business one and a personal one, and then I just like didn't want to do that. Like, I'm posting the same content. It was exhausting trying to do both. It was exhausting trying to build engagement on a new platform it's really like, there's no wrong answer. Just kind of do whatever feels the most comfortable for you where you are in your career. Because I am my brand. Like, I don't have a larger company right now. I don't have a larger thing. And when I was working at larger organizations, I made sure to pull that traffic towards them, but I wasn't trying to convince anybody that I was both of those things.
I really love that advice, because that's something that's important to me as an artist and a founder. I really feel that I'm going to insist that I be allowed to be myself in all of my interactions. I am no longer able to code switch. I am no longer able to, flatten my hair if I don't want to. I just really am feeling that part of the reason why I'm made my own business, and also the reason why we're named after Maroons and Maroon societies, is because people should be allowed to be themselves and define freedom for themselves and not have to be tied to other people's expectations. And so I do think that I'm going to just leave my Instagram the way it is. And if you like it, then this is a good match. If you don't, then maybe it's not a good match at all. Because I am an extension of my business. And I think that ties in really well to a question we had in the chat. I'll scroll up and get it because I just saw it, Camille. But somebody was wanting to know about what it's like to be an activist in networking settings, and the line between standing for what you believe in and being able to gain connections in a platform that can elevate activism. And then Annie actually followed up with that by saying, specifically situations in which you have a choice between speaking up or not around authority figures or prolific figure in the industry. So basically, and correct me if I'm wrong in the chat, Annie, but I think we're just talking about like being able to speak truth to power, and how does that affect your networking situation? What do you all think?
Annie, I love your question. I have asked myself this question a lot, and especially, I worked for an organization that was, an advocacy organization. And I ask myself this often. I have very strong personal beliefs, and I am quite vocal about my activism. And I also know that, progress moves at the speed of trust, right? And so we have to be able to depending on what we're trying to shift. I believe there's a role for the agitator and there's a role for the bridge builder. And those are not like separate. Those are not separate functions. They are not in opposition. They are like both a really important function of how we drive change. So there are going to be people, and it's really just like a self-determination. Am I in this situation? Am I the bridge builder? Or am I the agitator that needs to really kick up the dust? And you can be both in your career, and you can be both in the same week, but knowing kind of like contextually. So there have been times in my career where I've been the agitator. I'm outside of a system that I know needs to change. And so my work is around organizing people who are like-minded and finding the opportunities and the leverage points and coming strong and saying like, this is what we demand. This is what's right. And this is what this moment requires. And like, I've also been the bridge builder, but I have never like given up the integrity of what I believe in those scenarios. But I have in different scenarios said, my intention in this is to be able to get the ear of somebody and then sit with them so that they can hear my story or the story of the communities that I am working with, so they understand what this is. And then I have to build that trust, which is not foregoing our own integrity, right? But it is making the commitment that in this scenario, I'm going to stay in a place of like, how do I build connection with you so that you can hear me? Mm-hmm. And the agitators can also do that and be heard. There's a function for both. And so I'm long-winded way because I feel passionate about this question. I love that you asked it. I think it's like one that we should be asking ourselves often. But I think knowing like, what is my intention and what's my outcome? What is the long-term game, and who am I representing? Because it's never just our individual voices. It's who if we get to sit at a table, we're representing so many other people who are not at that table. So what are we representing? What's our intention, and what's our hopeful outcome? And then letting that drive the decision of how we show up.
what a great response. Yes. Michaela, do you have anything to add?
Yes. So specifically situations in which you have a choice of speaking up or not around authority figures or prolific figures in an industry. I have a very specific example of this where I was working somewhere. There was an executive director who was not doing ethical or great things, and it got really uncomfortable. And at some point, I finally just had to stand up and say, like, this is not great. This is not a sustainable work environment. This is not practical things. And it was a big risk. And I ended up losing that job temporarily, but it started a catalyst of being able to get leadership replaced in that organization. And so even though I personally had to take, and it really did become a conversation with myself of like, what is my own limitation? What are the things that I believe in, and what are the things that I stand for? And at what point does this become too much? And so I did find it going against my personal code of ethics, my personal code of activism, and advocating for people like me and people around me. And it was a really tough decision, but I'm still really proud of the decision that I made, even though I did end up losing that job, because it did push for larger change. And I know not everyone could be in that position. Not everyone, especially now, can afford to lose their job, especially in the current economic climate. But there are always moments where it's like, is this relationship actually functional anymore? Is this group, and again, we're talking about like outgrowing circles, it's like, is this group healthy for me? And also knowing that like everyone that knows me knows that I'm like an advocate and activist for women's rights. And so you better not say anything disrespectful about women in front of me, because I will say something. And that's part of my package. That's part of my brand. And I have quit jobs because they had all male boards. And it's like, unfortunately, sometimes you got to step away from projects where you know that they don't align with who you are or what you're trying to do. And then people will know, like, oh, well, if we want to work with Michaela, we better have women and people of color on our board. And if we want to work with Michaela, then we need to make sure that like these things are in line. So I think it is just about, it's scary to stand up for yourself, but it's the only way to try and implement change around you. And that is very much like a leadership thing that is very, very hard and very, very challenging, but hopefully helps to implement larger change.
Can I add one thing to that before we move? I actually think that it's like a perfect illustration too of your network, strength in numbers. So if I have very particular scenarios where I'm thinking about my professional life where there was a person in a seat of decision making, and being able, whether it's within an organization or with it's in your community and it's a policy change issue and it's an advocacy to a politician or whatever it might be, but being able to, this is where this network really is so essential. And it is like one of the strongest ways I have built community and relationships is an alignment around issues. So, when I was one of the organizers for the original Women's March in LA in 2017, that was like one of the strongest places where I was building network and relationships around something that we were all deeply passionate about. And that continued to then expand my professional opportunities, which I had never thought about at the time because I was really just focused on like the issues that we were aligning towards. But as we're like contextualizing it in this conversation, I actually think that it's both a function of having a network so that you can engage that network to progress change, and then also like what opportunities are expanded in those networks of people you organize alongside.
I really love this topic because, as I mentioned before, that's what my organization is all about. There was a time in my life where I thought that I was going to be able to work my way up an arts administrative ladder, but coming into the industry when I did and graduate, during that time period, there wasn't a lot of conversation about diversity or gender equity or pay equity in the field. And so I just quickly found that it's not for me. I can't sit in a position where I know that there's wrong being done and not say anything. I just can't do it. And so what that realization has done for me is that it has empowered me to start my own business, because I do think that there is a need for diverse perspectives in the industry. And it has also reframed who I consider to be a prolific authority figure in the field. It's kind of reframed what organizations I believe are the important organizations to pay attention to. And it's made me reconsider if I feel that the funding is going in the right direction, right? And so I think that just, you learn a lot about yourself when you're put into situations like that. And there are some people who are better designed to do that work than me. I that's just my perspective. There are people that have to change from within. Stacey Abrams is getting a lot of love today. She's a person who lost her governor's race, for reasons that people, don't necessarily agree with. But had that been me, I'm the type of personality where I maybe would have quit at that point and been like, you know what, I need to do something else. But so there are people who have to stay and work within and challenge power from, places within institutions. I'm personally not one of those people, but I do think that there is a need for both perspectives. I think, yes, I'm just checking the chat for questions. If you have any questions for our guests, please make sure that you add them in the chat. Build your own table. That is the truth. So yeah, if there's no seat at the table, you just build your own table. I think Shirley Chisholm said that.
And I would love to add, talking about the reframing, especially now, especially with the reckoning that theater is going through, and being able to see these conversations from the position that I'm in, and being able to see how people are reacting to COVID. I'm really recognizing, I'm like, there's some leaders that I was so intimidated by that I'm like, oh, okay, now I kind of see how this works in your brain and things like that. And so it's about reshifting of okay, so you've been an artistic director of a theater company for 10, 15, 20 years, which is great. You have those skills. I also have a master's degree in nonprofit management. So we both have our skills, and breaking down what skills are more valuable in this specific moment. So I do think you don't always have to be intimidated by the person who's older than you just because they are a self-appointed leader in a system they created.
Here to that. I definitely agree with that. We did have a question from the chat about moving to a new city. This is something that I think I mentioned ahead of time. So I'm originally from Texas. I've been in LA for about 3.5 years now, but all my exes live in Texas. And I found that when I first moved out here, it was really, really hard to find a community and to find a group of people who I felt that I felt comfortable building with. Do you all have any advice for that?
When I moved back to LA after I finished undergrad to start a grad program, because I was out of LA for almost a year, it's just going to things by yourself and it's honestly just making friends by going to things that you find interesting. So for me, that was actually just going to, there was a, plugging CTG again, there was a young subscribers program for anyone that was under 40 or 35 or something. And I just got that subscription package and just started going to these cocktail happy hours and made a bunch of friends. So it's just showing up, and then I, would volunteer at things and just showing up in places where you like to go, and hopefully you'll find other people that like those things. And Facebook groups are really helpful.
Yeah, when I'm from LA, but I lived in San Diego for about 10 years. And when I was coming back, there was a job that I really wanted. And so I went on, I think it was on my Facebook, and I was just like, who do I know that might know somebody? It was either LinkedIn or Facebook. And I found an old friend from college that I didn't know well. I didn't even know they were in LA. So I just started kind of seeing, you can filter in Facebook, who's in LA, or filter in LinkedIn and who might have a circle of connection to the organization. I asked them to go to coffee and just share what they knew about this organization and the field in general. And it was truly because of that conversation that I had this insight into different things that I couldn't have found on the website, that I couldn't have found in Google. And that really helped me get situated in that opportunity. So I think, back to technology is like utilize, even if it's somebody you haven't, and I hadn't been in touch with them in years and years and years, and we were not close friends, but because we had just a sliver of connection, we just utilize that, and people are so happy to help you find community when they found it, because we've all been there. Like, we've all had to start fresh somewhere, and have all been grateful for that one person who was like, let me bring you out to my dinner party, or let me take you to coffee with this person and introduce you to this person. And I've just been very humbled and grateful every time somebody does that for me. And now, especially if you are then in the seat of having those relationships, you can pass that along.
Yes. And I would also add to that and say be patient, because after being in LA for about 3.5 years, I just now feel like I've got a network of people that I can start, building relationships with here. So yeah, definitely be patient. I really love that advice of like just going on your social media pages and see who is in the area or near the area that you'll be moving to. I've never even thought about that. But same as you, there have been times where I didn't realize that somebody was living out here. I didn't even realize that they had moved. So yeah, definitely that, being patient. And I would say also, don't forget that with technology, to a certain extent, you can still stay engaged with the community that you're leaving. And maybe it's an opportunity to build a bridge. I did kind of want to come back to technology for a minute. We talked a little bit about how to identify community and how to like find networking groups through technology. But for those of us who are starting organizations or producing projects on our own, how can we use technology to stay engaged with our community? Keeping people updated. I know that Maroon Arts and Culture has a ton of programs, but everybody doesn't always know about everything. I'm having a hard time like keeping everybody in the loop. So do you have any advice for engaging your community and maybe even using technology to do that?
I would say just making sure, again, where your audiences are. And so when I was working at LA Stage Alliance, I kind of had 3 demographics of people. I had like the producers who were members, who were very clear that like they needed to get an email from me to read it. And then they also had a Facebook group. And then I had the Ovation voters, who, again, mostly through email, through individual specific email. And then we had like our larger just audience. And so it's just about making sure that you can't always send a generic email to all 3 of those groups. Mm-hmm. Like even if the information is the same, you need to just change it a little so that they feel like they are being talked to as a specific person and a specific group, so that they feel connected and that it's not just like a blanket statement. And just it takes time to be able to learn how people want to be communicated with. I know you were talking earlier about a text thing, because your target audience is millennials, and they seem to be on their phones more than checking their emails. And so it's like, yeah, if that's how your group wants to connect, like, but then your funders, like you were saying earlier, like your funders probably don't want that like generic text message. They probably want the email. And so it does take a little extra effort, but just really knowing how each individual group in your life wants to be communicated with, and also like planning that engagement and saying like, the first week of the month, I am going to email all of my funders, even if I don't have anything going on, just to say hi. And, same with just like, here's an update. Even if it's like the update is, we don't have an update, but we're still looking for like we're still trying. And just, that's what it is. It's just specific content towards each individual group of people.
Oh my gosh, I'm so bad at the planning the stuff, like the planning the emails and organizing that whole thing. I'm just not very good at it. But since you did mention it, yes, Maroon Art, if you like anything that Maroon Arts and Culture that I've said today, if you feel like you're the type of person that connect with us, you can text Maroon to 474747, and then you could be added to our list, to our community. Christina, do you have any advice for keeping your community engaged, and maybe even using technology to do so?
I love what you're doing right now. This is beautiful. Case in point, you are displaying it. It's funny. I wrote 2 things down, and Michaela, you said them, so I'll just underscore, which is like be consistent and plan time weekly. So, and knowing, like you said, who your audience is and what's the story you're telling. Like we have to think of ourselves as storytellers all the time. So, be consistent, be diligent, have accountability to yourself or to your teammates or whoever. Maybe you have an accountability group that's like, we're all on the first of the month, we're going to get on a Zoom call for 30 minutes and we're all going to plan our weekly email, or we're going to do, what do you think of this? Troubleshoot with people who are doing something similar, get them to be a proofreader on your email, or vice versa, and having that accountability structure of other people who also are trying to work on this. I know for myself, it's something I work on too, balancing telling my story and also just being in the work. And so getting clear on like, I value telling my story. I value spending time doing this. It's an important part of what I do and how I move in the world. And then once you're grounded in that like core belief and conviction, then building the time and then having the accountability.
I'm going to take these notes very seriously because this is, again, an area where I struggle. It's the planning and the implementation. But, I do feel passionately about the story. So I like to talk about the story, but I have a hard time sometimes like articulating to people exactly what it is that I do and how I might need their help with certain things. So I'm trying to get better about that. Do you all have any advice? And just really quickly, if you have any last minute questions for Christina, drop them in the chat because she's got to leave soon. But really quickly, do you all have any advice for talking about yourself and your projects to people in order to build that community and that network?
Oof, I will just say it does not necessarily get easier. I always am like, okay, how do I want to talk about this? What is this about? There's a great book, and there's like a very short TED Talk, Start With Why, Simon Sinek. And I have just tried to come back to that principle a lot. Instead of telling people what I do, I say why I do it first and try to use that as kind of the hook. And it's also good practice for me. I by saying it out loud or writing it down, I remind myself why I'm doing this work, why I'm spending this time building a company, or why I'm spending time in this project or with this organization. And so I have found it sometimes more helpful for my own sense of conviction and recommitment to what I'm working on, almost more helpful sometimes than it is to communicate out to my network. And that's totally fine. Sometimes it's just that self-reminder. And when you take the time to write it down, you reinforce it for yourself.
Thank you. Michaela, do you have anything to add?
That was like such great advice. Definitely start with why. I think it's also, for me, now that I'm not with a specific, it was really easy to promote when I was working with companies or working at a company, because I was like, oh, it's not me, it's like this. And so now when it's just me, one, reminding myself that like giving myself the permission to say like, I'm allowed to do this. Like I'm allowed to work on this project that's important to me. And also remembering that these things are not about me. Like it's the projects that I'm working on. And I think this is very true for at least the two of you in this conversation, is like, it's not about me and look at the work that I'm doing and I'm so great. We're doing this work because it's important to the sector and to the future and to the people around us. And even if we're trying to do work that helps people we don't even know. And so that's what I try to remind myself. It's like, I have to do this work and I have to talk about this work because someone needs this. Like someone needs this information that I have. And it's not about like, look how smart I am. It's like, please take these resources that I have for this community. And to me, that's always like, it's about getting over myself and saying like, it's not about me showing up and telling everybody how great I am. It's me trying to share the information and resources or product or whatever I'm doing because I built it because I know someone needs it. And so it's like, it's about them. Make it about the person you're trying to help. And that helps me get over getting stressed about marketing myself.
Thank you so much. We're going to say goodbye to Christina for now, but thank you so much for all of the wonderful advice that you shared with us today. We still have Michaela for a few more moments, so please feel free to ask any questions that you may have in the chat. But for now, we will see you. We will see you later. Thank you so much, Christina.
Such a pleasure. And it's so, and whenever I get to be a part of these conversations, it's just that reminder, like we're all in stuff, you know, we're all like advancing our own work and working with each other. And like these spaces and the space that you're offering is so valuable. I'm so grateful to be here. And thank you all.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend. And then with Michaela, somebody had a really great question that I think you would be the perfect person to answer. They want to know different ways of building a professional looking Instagram page. So since you mentioned that your Instagram page kind of functions as your business card, can you give us some advice on how we can be as professional as you?
Sure. First, I wanted to address someone in the chat. I think it was Annie again saying like they're nervous about if they say something, they will ruin their career. If I had $1 for every time someone said I'll never work in this industry again, I wouldn't have to work because I know that that's who I am. I'm bold. I say things that make people uncomfortable because I am one of those agitator, game changer people, which is different than just being like rude. Like I don't think I'm a rude person, but I have said a lot of things that have made a lot of people in power upset, and that's okay. I'm still here. I'm still making it work. I'm still getting paid for stuff. So at least somebody likes me.
Same here. So just so you know out there, I too have spent some time telling people the truth, and speaking truth to power does not always go the way that it should. Sometimes it gets you put on lists that, you know, make it hard. But at the end of the day, when you have the right thing on your side, like not to say that you're like a moral judge or anything, but when to echo something that was said earlier, but when you're fighting for what's right and you're speaking on behalf of another group and you're wanting to do good work, then that will be a reward in itself. It may not come right away, but it'll come back around, I promise.
Yeah.
So let's see, Instagram page, how to make it.
So I think it's just about like how do you want to present yourself and how do you want to what do you want people to know about you? And so it's like that's not necessarily just professionally, but also personally. Like, what do you want people to know about you? And so for me, my brand is very much about like live entertainment and community building, and mostly it's about theater. And so a lot of the things that I post do have like personal touches to them about why something's important to me. But I am going to post a picture of me at a concert. I also think me being at a concert is on brand for what I do and the work that I do. And, you know, sometimes it's pictures of me traveling because I think that also is something that's important to my brand and important to just like the values that I bring to the table, is that I have been out and about in the world. So, and it's also just like, you don't have to be hypercritical or censor yourself a lot, but like, do you really have to post a picture of you like, you know, drinking at 3 a.m. with like your friends? And like, you know, we're all young and people and like that happens, but it's also like, if you're consistently posting that stuff, that's what people are going to think about you. Especially when you're young, because it's like, who are you trying to impress and what content will impress them? Because I feel like that's the basic concept of social media, is like you're putting stuff out there because you want to express yourself and hopefully people will resonate with it. So in what ways are you trying to express yourself? If that makes sense. It's not about like, because one, I think the concept of professionalism and looking like correct for the business is 100% like patriarchal white supremacy. So like forget about any of that notion, but just about like, how do you want to show up? And sometimes that's concerts, sometimes that's traveling, sometimes that's posting about theater. But I do think it is, the concept of social media is about personal engagement. And so if you're just posting a picture, like if today I just posted a picture of like the CTG logo and was like, I'm doing a panel, people aren't necessarily going to react to that. But I posted something on my story being like, hey, I'm doing this panel, I'm really excited, check it out, link in bio. So those are kind of like the differences of what you're doing. And so, you know, and if you are, you know, if you are a advocate for the cannabis industry and you post a lot of pictures of you smoking weed, that's fine. That's a very legal thing that you can do as an adult. If that is not what you're going for, maybe don't post that. you also don't have to post your whole like life on social media all the time. Like,
I feel like you've seen my Instagram page and you're talking to me personally right now.
I have not. I will follow you on Instagram, but
I'm
like,
just kidding. I'm just kidding. I do want to say also that there is an unofficial Working in Theater Facebook page. If you are not in that group, go ahead. Yeah, it's a group, not a page, right? I think it's a group. If you're not in that group, you should get into that group. And then let's do a follow back Friday today where everyone can drop their LinkedIn, their Instagram, and their Facebook, and maybe we can start to build some community with starting with our fellow participants in this program. So it's the Working in Theater series. There's a Facebook group. It's unofficial. It's self-organized, but the link for it is in the chat. So definitely go join the group, and then we'll do a follow back Friday, and we can start to build community. Do you have experience with Facebook groups at all? Like, do you find them to be valuable places to network and or engage, network, and community?
yes and no. I do think that they're helpful. So I think it depends on so I'm part of the CTG intern alumni page, and I find that page extremely helpful. There are some other pages that are, I think, somewhat toxic. So I was part of this other theater networking page that especially when AB5 was happening and people had various opinions on it, and people got nasty, and it was that's not a group. And it's helpful because now I know who to work with and who not to, because I was taking note of who is being completely unprofessional and completely rude. But I also think it's helpful for those moments where you're I need, if I'm hey, has anybody used a text service before? Can you help me? I'm interested in doing this. And then you're on that group too, and you're hey, I just started doing it. Let's chat. So I do find those helpful, or finding volunteer opportunities, or finding things that you're interested in, especially if you're new to the area. I think those Facebook groups can be helpful. I also think specifically in theater, the boundaries of Facebook can get blurred because it is a more personal platform. So I have had people try to DM me, specifically men, at 1 a.m., 2 a.m. And I'm we're not here for this. So it's finding those boundaries and setting those boundaries. So, but I do think sometimes they can be helpful.
Yeah, I struggle with Facebook sometimes because Maroon Arts and Culture has a Facebook page. I'll put it somewhere because I'm supposed to be getting better at this. But yeah, once people go to the page and they like it, I don't know that it necessarily turns into it doesn't necessarily make it easier to engage with people or start conversations and hear feedback and these kinds of things. So yeah, I kind of am struggling with how to use social media to grow and engage with my community. Yeah, in general. I don't even have my link for Facebook ready to go. So I think that we're probably going to wrap it up here soon. But if anyone in the chat has any additional questions, please make sure that you ask them now. We've got we pulled a lot of really good resources today. So I'll try to make sure I add them to the Padlet. And we just want to make sure that, I did have one other question. Camille's got my Facebook on there. It's in the chat now. So y'all go like us. Thank you. Thank you so much. My question was about COVID-19, which I think we actually covered just a little bit. But do you have any recommendations for people who are wanting to make connections as young theater professionals, emerging theater or arts professionals? Do you have any recommendations that people can kind of look to now, and so they can start building their network now, even though we're still in a socially distant situation?
Yes, that has been a challenge, even for me, because I'm such an extroverted person. And I think it is I mean, the way that I've been making connections is probably the most through like Facebook and Instagram, just because I've been able to, but also like in the last week, I had to get off Facebook because if we know what happened this week. And so I like had to delete all my social media for a minute, but it start with the people you are comfortable with, because right now networking is more emotionally exhausting than it has been in the past. And so mostly I've been doing like Instagram DMs because that's a platform I know I'm comfortable on. I've been doing, you know, I've been trying to reconnect with people I already know and build those relationships as opposed to trying to build new relationships right now. Because I think that is what is more effective for me at the moment. Because it's right now it's really hard to build new relationships from scratch. So yeah, it's just been about like, how do I continue to cultivate relationships I already have? And sometimes that does lead to new relationships. They're like, hey, I have this friend you should meet. But yeah, Facebook groups are really helpful. Instagram is really helpful. Those I think are the two most important things I've been doing lately. And just cold emails. They're old school, but cold emails of being like, hey, I saw this thing that you did. I have a couple questions. Could we grab some coffee over Zoom? Blah, blah, blah.
Okay, that's really good advice because, yeah, again, I've been struggling, especially in our new reality. I would also say, don't forget to check out Emerging Arts Leaders of LA. That's the organization that Michaela works with. Also, too, I wanted to throw out there that see if there are any professional organizations that fit to your the type of art that you do. I am a dramaturg, so I'm a member of the Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of the Americas Association, Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of Americas Association. And I have found that within that professional organization, there have been grant opportunities. They also have things like how much to charge, contract samples, these kinds of things. So I look forward to going to the conference, and I've met a lot of people through their Facebook page. So getting specific about professional organizations that might be like specific to your area of artistry, that's another good way to find community. We also have another question, best practices. Oh, here, I'll put it up here. Any best practices for networking / building further relationships with professors and former employers? I always feel weird talking to them about non-classwork related things, especially afterwards. Ooh, same.
Yeah, so I feel like I have pretty good relationships with past employers, minus the guy that fired me, and past professors. And I think it is what was the most challenging part for me was being able to show up as a new person, because obviously like someone that knew me when I was 19, like I'm a much different person now at almost 26. And so recognizing that I think the hardest part was like recognizing they saw me when I was not at the same level I'm at now, and recognizing that they probably still want to work with me. And again, it's always just about reminding myself that people probably like me and they want to work with me and they're interested, and especially past employers and past professors, because they help teach you and they help you get here. And so even if it's just like recognizing that, and again, just like showing up and supporting them as well. And so my past employers, I still try to go to their shows as often as possible. Past professors, if they're working on something, I try to go to that show, or I try to like it or share it or whatever. And it's just like any other relationship. And once you start to, especially once you've graduated or moved on to a different job, they're not, that authority disconnect isn't necessarily there anymore. Obviously, there's still someone that's a little older, a little wiser, a little more established in their career. So you still want to have that level of respect, but knowing that you're growing too, and they were part of that journey, and you can keep them part of that journey, especially if they're doing work that you're still interested in. Mm-hmm. So like I was a producer's assistant for 2 years, and I needed to move on because I just needed a different challenge in my career. And she knew that, and we had a great relationship, and we ended on really solid terms because she knew it was time for me to move on. And so we're still in touch, and I send her emails every now and then, and we get coffee, and I ask her for advice. So I think that's the best thing is like, hey, you know a little bit more of my background story. I have some questions. Could you help me answer them? And so continuing that relationship of like mentorship is probably the easiest way to stay in touch with those people.
I think that is so important. Once you are graduated out of your program, your professors are now just really valuable resources for letters of recommendation. This is assuming that you left a good impression, right? And the same with former employers, not necessarily just professors, for those of us who didn't necessarily go traditional education track. But their letters of recommendation, they can help you find new jobs and new career opportunities. In my case, building an arts organization, I actually have a few of my two of my former professors on my advisory board, because they gave me great advice while I was in my master's program, and I just got to continue to get that good advice from them. And also on the other side, having been a teacher and having taught at the university level, you just expect your students to reach out to you and contact you and talk to you after you're finished. It's kind of part of the job. It's a fun part of the job. You get to see how you've impacted people. I used to teach 8th grade. I don't want to age myself, but I used to teach 8th grade theater. And the other day, one of my former students found me on LinkedIn, and I just was like, mind was blown. But I was also really happy to see them and hear from them, and to, just kind of know what they're up to. And if they ever needed anything, I'd be happy to engage with them. So yeah, don't be afraid. Again, it's just like, just nothing to it but to do it. We have a few more questions. Some people were wanting to know if you'll look at their page and give them impressions, but we don't know if Michaela will have time with that, but you can always put your handle in the chat, and if she can, she will. For somebody, Pamela was wanting to know, how can one get over feeling too old to build a social media platform / online presence?
I try to remind myself that the rules aren't real. Like, these social constructs aren't real. And so, especially when it comes to social media, like TikTok, for example, that I mentioned earlier, most people are saying they're too old for TikTok. And I'm like, but where is this law? Where is this thing that if I'm 25 and on TikTok, someone's going to come to my house and steal my phone? And I think it is just, again, about, we put so much pressure on ourselves to show up on social media or to follow these rules that we think exist, specifically for social media. And I think it's, you're not too old to build a social media platform. Honestly, like, just do it and put yourself out there. And it's really hard to put yourself out there, especially in social media, because when you just get started, it feels like you're screaming into the void. But eventually people will start to, respond back, or I think the biggest thing about networking and community building, and people forget about this with social media, is that these are long-term things. They take a lot of time and they take a lot of patience. And so this relationship that I have with my professors has been 7 years in the making, since, I started college. And these relationships that I've had with the person that I mentioned earlier that I co-produced the Ovation Awards with, that's a 4-year relationship that we've been building. And so it takes time, and that's okay, because you're going to grow and you're going to learn, and you're going to start to learn what you want to do in this community. And that also might change. Like, when I first started in LA theater, I thought I wanted to be a stage manager. And then I realized that I much prefer working in an organizational level. And now I'm even more specific of, I like working with art service organizations. And but those past relationships of when I was a stage manager don't just go away, and they don't just stop counting. So I think it's just patience and continuing to show up even when you don't want to, because someone might appreciate it that you did anyway.
Yes. And just know that there will be a learning curve too, right? Like, don't be intimidated by the learning curve. You may not get it overnight, but like Michaela just said, patience is so important. It's just one step at a time, but follow your instincts. If you feel that your project, your organization, you as an individual artist, if you feel like you would benefit from a social media presence, then go for it and invest the time and the energy in creating it, because People may tell you that you're too old for it or it's a waste of time, but they'll be sadly mistaken. That's just the way that the direction that we're all going. When I think of the accounts that I follow, there's no age limit on the people I follow. I follow Beyonce, but I follow Beyonce's mom too. And, you know, her IG is just as interesting, if not more so. And so, yeah, there's people of all ages on social media. Yeah, definitely get comfortable. I think that that's all of our questions for today. Thank you so much, Michaela, for spending time with us, for giving us so much great advice, for giving us so many good nuggets and resources. I'll try to remember to put them all on the Padlet. Don't forget, we are all going over to the unofficial Facebook group for Follow Back Friday. So you can drop your LinkedIn and your Instagram and your Facebook handles, everything there. And please make sure that you join us next week. Next week's topic is what's your budget? Because as you build these strategic partnerships, develop this community and develop these networks in order to make your art, a lot of people, the first question is going to be, well, what's your budget? And so you're not going to be able to answer that question unless you know exactly what goes into creating a budget. I know for me, I'm filling out grant applications all weekend, and I almost wish I would have scheduled this panel for today because I could use some help, but I'm going to take my experience and I'm going to bring it with me next week and we'll discuss. So thank you all so much for joining us, and I will see all of our participants next week. And thank you very much, Michaela.
Thank you.